So, now it's okay if you didn't get this far because that was a lot of stuff. Okay, so once again, I'd encourage to look at the videos, look at the example scenes. They're all set up, and just kind of the really cool thing about learning Houdini, especially from other people, is that you can go through and you can look at the steps it took to do it. With other programs, like, well, I wonder how they did that because I see this over here and I see this over here, but in Houdini, it's actually a very clear set of operations, and you don't just stop learning Houdini once you get a job. Like, once you get a job, you're always learning from other people how they set up their scenes, or you might have to take one of their scenes and modify it to do one of your shots. So whenever I start a shot and I know it's been probably done similarly before, I'll message the guy who might have done that and say, hey, I saw you did this a few months ago. Do you have any scenes that I can look at? And sometimes they're like, oh, sure. And sometimes like, oh, well, it wasn't really that relevant, so you're better off doing it on your own. But yeah, I mean, you always want a starting point, because the second that like a junior gets in the studio, what I always see is that they want to do everything on their own because they're scared to ask for help. They're scared to take another scene and learn from it. It shouldn't be, because people really want to help, and Houdini is great to learn all these different workflows that you never would have thought of before. Okay, so let's finish up this thing here. All right, so now a question was asked earlier, okay, so now do we need a rigid body simulation to break these things? Now, maybe we would if some pieces were gonna like tumble out of the holes and kind of roll a little bit on the ground. We had a really good close-up camera of it rolling, but that's one of the beauties of Houdini, is that it's really good at simulating stuff, but most of the time you don't even need to, because we have so much control over our geometry that we often don't need a simulation for that. A bullet impact isn't going to take a frame, so we would never need to simulate the bullet impact itself, would we? Okay, because it's going to be less than a frame to actually go from point A to point B. All right, so how can we do this without a simulation? Well, I would just like move these back. I would like do this. Okay, so if I like select a piece and let's see, there's like, I remember these, you don't really use the viewport much in Houdini, so okay, and if I transform that, okay, I would actually take this and move it back, and that would be my effect. Okay, move it back there. Okay, so if I did that to these holes as the bullet hit, that's all I really need, right? I don't need a sim, I just need to kind of cave them in as if they got hit. Okay. Alright, so how do I do that? Well, I want it to go from this to that. Okay? That's all I want. Just go this to that. But I don't want the whole thing to move. I just want the very specific piece that my particle is next to move, right? Well, no problem. So, all right, we're gonna take our holes. Now we don't just want the end frame. This time we actually want the animation. Okay, so I'm not going to use this. I'm going to use way up here. Get this guy. And then give this an attribute. Now, from last week, what is an attribute? We used an attribute to color our bricks differently. Remember? Okay, so right now, these particles have a few attributes just for being particles. They have life. They have ID, which is very important. They have normals, okay? They have color. Look at all these attributes on here now, because they're coming from a particle system, so the particle system put those attributes on here. But we want our own attribute. We want an attribute called hole. It can be anything, but I'm going to call it hole. Okay. All right, and I'm going to give this attribute a value of 1. Okay? Makes sense so far? So now, if I look at my spreadsheet of this, I go all the way to the end, and hey, where is it? I don't see it. Okay, there it is. So if I look at my attribute, I see my whole is a value of 1 for each point. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go to my wall, my fracture, my wall. Okay. I'm going to do an attribute create over here. This time I'm going to make the same attribute but have a value of 0. And they're just the default value of 0. See? A lot more points here. Okay. So here we've got a few points with whole value of 1, and here we've got, you know, maybe 1,000 points. Let's see how many we have. 62,000 points with a whole value of 0. And I'm going to attribute transfer one value onto another value. That's a really amazing ability of Houdini, and it's so useful for effects, is the ability to spatially transfer from one piece of geometry to a completely different piece of geometry. Different point count, different topology, different everything. You just spatially transfer that attribute. It's really great. So, attribute transfer. So my wall is going to go into this side, and my holes are going to go on this side. Now let's say I had a color on it. Or actually it already has the color, blue from the particles. I'll make that white so we can see it better. Okay. Now if we attribute transfer, notice it went blue because the color is getting transferred onto this wall, but it made the whole wall blue. Well, normally 10 is too big. That's 10 meters. Okay, that's what the default value is. If I go over to conditions, distance threshold, that's 10. All right, so I don't even want a distance threshold. I want a blend instead of just the straight up distance. Now we can see, isn't that cool? Look, we're transferring the color from those particles. Look at that. Onto the wall. Okay, so that's just color, but why do we do that whole attribute? Well, because a color, it can change, it's very messy. Some people do work with color. I don't like to. I like to keep everything as an attribute named an appropriate thing for organization. Okay? So instead of that, I'm going to go, and instead of everything, I'm just going to say I don't want color, I don't want normal, I just want this whole attribute. Okay? So now if I look at my spreadsheet, we see that there's different values for the whole, not just all 0. If we wanted to preview this, here's what I like to do. I like to make a point sop, add color, 1 minus the attribute, so it's whole, 1 minus whole. Okay, so now we're getting a red versus white preview of that attribute as it happens. Okay. See that? Okay. All right. Well, let's forget about the color for now. Let's actually make it do something with that attribute. We want it to push back, right? So we really want to do a blend between this and this with that attribute we just transferred, right? Now, what would that do if we only blend it with the parts that were red? Yeah. Your brain's hurt? Okay. It'll just push it back, right? If we just blend it between like the whole of 0 and the whole of 1, it would just push that back. Okay? So, use the point sop. Put this guy in the first input. Put our moved forward geometry. Our moved backward geometry is going to go in the second input. Okay? And we can do something like this. TX times 1 minus whole. Okay, so this is the complement of our whole. So that means if whole is 0, this will be 1. If whole is 0.5, this will be 0.5. So we're taking the original position, tx, multiplying that by the complement of whole. Now I'm going to add tx2, which is the x value of the second input, times whole. Okay, so what that does is if whole is 1, it'll blend towards the second input. If whole is 0, it'll blend towards the first input. Okay? So we'll do that for x, y, and z. All right. Look at that. Okay. Pretty cool, huh? If we want to manipulate how deep these holes are, we would just move this. Okay. If these are very strange bullets, we could, you know, move it forward. Probably not, though. All right. So once again, we did that by fracturing, moving it back, and using this attribute on our whole particles to blend between one attribute and a different value. Okay, using this attribute to blend. There we go. You see where it's more red, we get more of a blend between those two. All right. So, you guys, does that kind of make sense how that worked? I know this expression is a bit tricky, but this is your standard blend between two things. All right. Questions on that? The expression. Okay. So let's simplify that a bit. Okay, so I'm going to have a sphere over here. Okay, here's one sphere. And here's another sphere. Okay, so it's a different place. Yeah. All right. So I want to blend the position of these two spheres. Okay? So I'm going to do my point stop. Now both of these spheres have a single point, right? So this has 1 point, this has 1 point, this has a position, this has a position. Okay? So we want to blend between position 1 and position 2. Just like we're blending between each point's position here and each point's position here. Okay? All right, so I'm going to plug both of these into my point stop. All right, I'm going to make a spare parameter. So edit parameter interface, blend. Okay. Okay, and I'll just make it go from 0 to 1. Okay, so it goes from 0 to 1. Okay? Now, if I want to do, okay, a percentage of the first position. Let's move this sphere somewhere other than 0, 0, 0. Okay. Percentage of the first position, it would be tx times blend. Okay? So now I'm blending between the world 0 and whatever the x value of is. Okay, x value of the first input is. All right. So if we did that for all of them, okay, we're just going from 0, which is right here, to that. Okay, so that's how the first blend is working. If we put tx2 in here, okay, and then this one, then instead of doing that, it's going to go to the second. All right, so this is tx2 times blend. See, it's going from the origin to the second input's position. Okay, so where it gets tricky is I want to do both at the same time. I want one to go towards the second input, and I want the opposite direction of my slider to go to the first input. So a complement kind of works like this. I'll do it with color. Here's the value of 1, right? Now if I put this parameter over here, and I do 1 minus the color of red, then look what happens. This will always be 0 if this is always 1. So as I increase this, let's maybe see it while it goes. No. Okay. If this is 0.2, this will be 0.8. This is 0.3, this will be 0.7. You see how that works? It's called a complement. All right, so this is one value. This is 1 minus that value. It's complement. If this is 0.5, what will this be? Who said that? Oh, okay, yeah, it'll be 0.5. All right, so 1 minus 0.5 is 0.5. Okay. All right, so that's what we're doing with positions. Okay, so we want to do tx, the first input, as 1 minus the value. We want to do this, tx2, as the value. That way, if it goes from 0 to 1, I go from my first position to my second position. All right? So instead of this, I would do tx times 1 minus blend plus tx2 times blend. Okay, it's doing exactly what we just talked about. So I'll copy this to ty. And copy it to tz. All right, so now we have our blend between the first position and the second position. Okay. So if I move this guy, get that blend, different place. Okay, so that's all we did with the wall. We just did it to thousands of points instead of just 1 point. Okay, just blended between this one and this one. It's just the wall pushed back in on itself, and we're using our attribute here to blend between that and the other one. Okay, so it's a simple trick, and I use it all the time in Houdini. We don't have to do an RBD sim that way. We could try to RBD sim all those pieces pushing into the brick wall. We don't want to do that. We just want to be simple about it and quick. No sim required. We just do a simple blend between one and the other, and that's where the proceduralism is really cool, because you can do it spatially. All right. So why don't we play around with that this week? And next week we actually get into some RBDs where we are simulating some SOPs. Okay? Questions from this week? Anybody? Whose brain is tired?
I missed where the red dots came from. Did you guys paint
Those are from bullets.
Also, they transferred that.
Yeah. So here's our particle system. It's shooting bullets. Actually, looks like I'm only viewing one of the inputs. Okay, there we go. Alright, so we got these bullets here, right? And we made this stick to the wall so we knew exactly where it was going to hit. And one of the really cool things about Houdini is that we can, once it's cached, we can time shift so we know what the end result will be. So way up here, here's the animated holes. But if we use a time shift to the end, then it'll always go to here, and we can work with this independent of time. So it'll always know exactly where to fracture the wall. So if our system changes, we'd have efficient fractures at other points in the wall. So, cool.